This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Nick Miles, and at 13 hours GMT on Monday the 13th of August, these are our main stories. Turkey's currency has continued to fall. The government says it's taking action, but will it work? Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has blamed President Hassan Rouhani's government for the country's economic troubles. And how people in some remote areas of Peru are suffering metal poisoning, and they say it's caused by nearby mining. Also in this podcast, Afghan forces are still trying to regain control of a key city, several days after an assault by the Taliban. The British government has pledged to eradicate rough sleeping within 9 years, but can it succeed?
What's been announced today is a great policy on dealing with the symptoms and helping people who are rough sleeping. What hasn't been announced is anything which is about tackling the root causes.
And why a video of a former British Foreign Secretary serving tea to reporters has gone down very well in China. We begin in Turkey, where the country's currency, the lira, is collapsing. It's down a fifth on its value against the dollar in the course of just a week. These people in Istanbul are concerned.
We try to convert euros as much as we can. The rise in the euro is good for people who live in Europe, but it is really bad for Turkey and the Turkish economy. All we can do is convert our euros to lira, and we are doing that.
Of course, we're trying to take measures, but the country is heading in a bad direction. The ending just doesn't seem bright. We're all afraid because we can't foresee what will happen in a month. Honestly, the situation is not good.
Well, this fall in the lira's value comes after a widening diplomatic spat with the US, sparked by the detention of an American pastor. On Friday, President Trump doubled tariffs on Turkish steel and aluminium. Today, President Erdogan accused the United States of seeking to stab Turkey in the back. He also said he expected attacks on the economy to continue, but predicted the lira would return to rational levels soon. I asked our economics correspondent Andrew Walker, is it likely that Turkey's economy will indeed improve soon? And what would the government need to do to achieve this?
I don't think it's particularly likely on the strength of the kind of things he's been saying. His comments about talking about an international plot against the Turkish economy may well play very well politically with some audiences in Turkey, but they simply won't wash with the international financial markets. They're very much of the view, I think, that Turkey had some underlying vulnerabilities, which were certainly exacerbated as a result of the deepening political tensions that we saw with the United States last week. But those underlying vulnerabilities are not really being addressed by what we've seen from the government so far. And the mainstream view in the markets is that Turkey needs significantly higher interest rates to deal with a worsening inflation problem and to stabilise the currency. Higher interest rates would make it more attractive for people to hang on to their lira, not sell them as the way many people in the financial markets are doing. But President Erdogan is very much opposed to that. It's not his decision, but he has certainly been seeking to exercise influence over the central bank.
We were expecting the government to announce a package of reforms. That hasn't happened yet, but the central bank did introduce some measures. Will those be enough to make a difference?
I think they may help, and they did in the immediate aftermath see a little bit of a reversal of the decline in the value of the currency. What the central bank has been doing has been easing some of the reserve requirements that commercial banks have to hold. That'll make it a little bit easier for them to meet all the demands that their customers might have for converting money into foreign currency, paying bills, or simply withdrawing funds without there being a danger of any individual bank getting into very serious difficulty.
And briefly, Andrew, is there a danger of the C word, contagion, other countries being sucked into this difficulties?
There's been a little bit of an impact on some other emerging market currencies, South Africa, for example, India. But so far, the effect has not been very large. Investors, I think, are pretty discriminating to a degree. They're looking at particular vulnerabilities that countries have, and they've, for a long time, had some concerns about Turkey.
That was Andrew Walker, our economics correspondent. Well, it's not just Turkey which is having issues with its currency. In Iran, the rial has slumped in recent months, dropping in value by 70%. Food prices have also risen sharply, and this has led to protests across the country. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has come out and blamed not the recently imposed US sanctions on Tehran, but mismanagement by President Hassan Rouhani's government. Amir Paivar from our Persian service told me why Mr Khamenei has criticised the president so strongly.
You have to find someone to blame all the misery of the Iranian people are suffering right now. To some extent, the Supreme Leader is actually right in saying that the government did not handle the crisis properly. The government tried to force a single fixed rate for exchange rate between rial, the Iranian currency, and the dollar, which didn't work. But saying that it is just the government, I think it's downplaying the impact the sanctions have had on the Iranian economy. It was the U.S. sanctions, actually, the U.S. pulling out of Iran nuclear deal that triggered this whole crisis.
It seems strange, doesn't it? Because it's almost letting America off the hook for some of this damage.
It is, but we have to also remember President Hassan Rouhani has been summoned to the parliament and will soon appear in front of the MPs. This will weaken his position even further. And there's always been speculation that at some point, if the crisis gets even worse, that there could be a complete cabinet reshuffle or change of government. So this doesn't really help President Rouhani in his case when he appears in front of the Iranian parliamentarians.
Amir Paivar from our Persian service. And shortly after that interview was recorded, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei tweeted that there will be no war nor negotiations with the United States. The heads of Kenya's state railway and the agency that manages public land have been charged with fraud. Atanas Maina and Mohamed Swazuri are accused of paying more than $2 million for land which already belonged to the government. They pleaded not guilty. Ferdinand Omondi reports.
Mr. Swazuri was among 17 people put in the dock today to answer a multitude of corruption-related charges. They were accused of conspiring to defraud the public by paying compensation money for land which was already owned by the government. The land in question was acquired for the construction of a Chinese-funded standard gauge railway which cost the taxpayer more than $3 billion. Economists have always maintained that the railway cost was inflated amid denials from the government.
Ferdinand Amonde reporting. The thaw in relations between North and South Korea was always going to oscillate a bit, and recently North Korea has been rather critical of its southern neighbour for complying with US-led sanctions against Pyongyang. But it seems that won't stop top-level meetings between the two countries. It's been announced that President Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un will meet next month in Pyongyang. For more on these talks, here's our correspondent in Seoul, Laura Bicker.
I think it's significant because when it comes to both the talks today and the invitation, for North Koreans to see the South Korean president coming north, especially after Kim Jong-un has done so much travelling lately, whether that be to the border to meet with President Moon, to Singapore, to meet with Donald Trump, to Beijing, to meet with President Xi. I think when it comes from a North Korean point of view, to see the leader of South Korea in Pyongyang, I think it will be a good coup for Kim Jong-un to say, look, we are progressing here, we met before, this is a chance for the two Koreas to find a way to build a relationship. Here in Seoul, they have what's known as the sunshine policy. And the idea is to build trust between the two Koreas before asking North Korea to give up all its nuclear weapons. And in many respects, North Korea has often said they want security guarantees. Remember, this is a peninsula that has been invaded so many times. And when it comes to giving up its weapons, North Korea believes it needs those nuclear weapons to defend itself. So the idea is to build trust. But the US wants those weapons given up before any sanctions are relieved and before there's a peace process. So President Moon could act as a bit of a go-between here and persuade at least the US to do something and perhaps persuade North Korea to do something too.
Laura Bicker, our correspondent in Seoul. The Peruvian government has declared several state of health emergencies in the centre of the country to treat people suffering from metal poisoning. Local people whose children are affected by serious health conditions say these have been caused by nearby mining. A recent report by Amnesty International has also highlighted 2 other regions in Peru where it believes that people are also affected by metal pollution. Grace Livingston reports from high in the Andes Mountains.
Grey breeze-block houses rise up the barren mountainside here in Cerro de Pasco. A layer of dust cakes the streets. A huge mine yielding silver, zinc and lead looms over one side of the town with open seams of red, brown and black earth. Wilma Tobalino lives on the hillside in a house made of stones, cement and corrugated iron. She says pollution from the mine has made her daughter very ill.
At first she felt pain in her feet. Then the nosebleeds began until they were uncontrollable. Uncontrollable until they took her to the emergency department at the children's hospital. She was in hospital a month and a half. I felt desperate when they told me she had leukemia.
But Wilma's daughter is not the only child who's ill in this town. I've come to talk to some of her neighbours outside in the street. It's just a dirt track. There's children playing.
My name is Irma Estrella. I have a son who is 12 years old. The symptoms he has are firstly bleeding, a lot of bleeding from the nose. And well, he isn't developing. The lead and arsenic in his blood is affecting his bones. My son was in hospital for 15 days because he couldn't move his knees. They took ultrasound and x-rays, and it seems that his nerves are paralysed. It could be that my son will lose the movement in his bones.
The government of Peru has so far declared 3 health emergencies here because dangerously high levels of lead, mercury and arsenic have been found in the soil and the water. But the government is not saying why there are so many poisonous metals in the environment here. Hola, muy bien. This is the Regional Health Authority in Pasco. Maruja Silvia monitors the impact of metal contamination here. She says 20% of the people surveyed have unsafe levels of lead in their blood.
Metals, especially lead, are causing mainly neurological problems in the population. Many children are being affected. Clearly, it's certain that the problem for a long time has been mining activity.
I'm in the bustling streets of Lima now. The Mines Ministry have not responded to my request for an interview, so I've come to speak to pro-government MP Gilbert Violeta.
Lo cierto es que no en todos los casos
It is certainly not true that in all cases contaminated water comes from mining waste. There are many cases where it does, but that's because these are old mines. The majority of these old mines have either been closed already or are in the process of being shut down. The new mining projects we have in Peru in general are very careful about how water is used.
Vulcan, the company that runs the mine in Cerro de Pasco, said it's confident that no contamination is coming from its operations. It's now majority owned by the Anglo-Swiss company Glencore, which said it's working with Vulcan to ensure it follows best practice standards. It's not certain that mining is the cause of metal poisoning, but many here think it's vital that a comprehensive study is carried out. Only when the source of contamination is known will it be possible to prevent more children like Shirley and Yan getting ill.
That report was by Grace Livingston. And if you go to the BBC World Service Facebook page, you'll find video footage from in and around the city of Cerro de Pasco, and you'll meet the families who featured in that report. Still to come in this podcast, how can the US reduce its enormous consumption of plastics?
Part of it is education and making sure that people understand that nothing's disposable. Nothing really truly is disposable.
Reports from the Afghan city of Ghazni speak of the Taliban being largely in control after 4 days of fighting. That's despite NATO saying that the Afghan government has regained control of the city. A health department official there has told the BBC that more than 100 people have been killed since Friday and more than 140 others wounded. And the UN has warned that food supplies are running low. The BBC's Shoaib Sharifi is in the Afghan capital, Kabul.
The fighting is still going on. It's very hard to verify who really controls the city. We at least know that it is still being contested. It's the 4th day that the city of nearly 300,000 who were stranded there is the battleground between the Taliban and Afghan security forces, and from the air, US bombers backing Afghan forces fighting the Taliban. The UN Humanitarian Office expressed concern about humanitarian situation there as people are stranded. The hospital can't cope for the number of the wounded, and it is very difficult to leave the city. Some of those people who attempted to leave, or some who managed to reach Kabul or the adjacent cities, told us that on the way they witnessed dead bodies, and people cannot attend the wounded or the dead because of the intensity of the situation in this very important and strategic city of Ghazni.
You say it's important strategically. How much concern is there amongst people in Afghanistan that it's taken so long to get this city back under control?
People are really concerned. So imagine in a city, you have your school, you're going to work, you as a journalist going to a government department, and you don't know how fragile the situation is. A very important city that people knew it may collapse, and now sadly it is a battleground. So people are really concerned why the government can't protect its citizens.
That was Sharab Sharifi speaking from our bureau in Kabul. China has denied that there is any suppression of ethnic minorities or violation of their religious beliefs in the name of counter-terrorism in its western Xinjiang region. It said it had taken action against what it called extremist and terrorist crimes in accordance with the law. Stephen McDonnell reports.
The United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has heard evidence of political indoctrination camps for ethnic Uyghur Muslims. But in a submission to the UN hearing, the Chinese delegation denied any so-called re-education centres exist. However, the Chinese government did say that some locals involved in minor offences are being sent to what it called training centres to assist in their rehabilitation. The delegation added that the Xinjiang region has been a victim of domestic terrorism.
That was Stephen McDonnell. Britain is a wealthy country, so why does it still have thousands of people living on doorsteps and pavements? It's a question the government here has pledged to tackle, and today it's committed itself to ending rough sleeping by 2027. John Sparks is chief executive of the homelessness charity Crisis, and Dan Damon asked him to sum up the scale of the problem in the UK and whether it's become worse in recent years.
It's certainly a big problem, and if you look at rough sleeping particularly, it's almost doubled in size over the last 6 or 7 years. And actually is set to continue to grow if we don't make any changes. So it's a significant issue. We think there were about 8,000 people sleeping rough at any one time, plus about the same number in cars and public transport and sheds and so on. But if you look at it in some ways, I mean, that's a small enough problem to solve.
What seems to have happened is that you don't get people just sort of wrapped in a blanket or even in newspaper under a cardboard box. They have tents now, which in some ways is dealing with the problem. But of course it's not, is it?
No, it's not dealing with the problem at all. I mean, it's dealing with their immediate safety and security and shelter. I mean, one of the things about rough sleeping is it's a very dangerous thing to do. So if you sleep rough, you're 17 times more likely to be the victim of a violent attack than the average person in the street. So, that's people looking after themselves, but we need to do a whole lot better than that. And that's why the UK government is announcing its strategy today.
What can be done then? And I think there are examples in other countries where they've tried to deal with homelessness. I think Finland is the good story.
Yeah, there are several countries where they've made probably more progress in some ways. Finland particularly, there's hardly anybody sleeps rough in Finland and only one hostel now. And they've done that by adopting the principle of housing first. So housing first is a principle that says if someone has a range of complex support needs and they're sleeping on the street or at risk of sleeping on the street, the very first thing you need to do is get them a house.
Right, so you don't tell them if they're addicted to something to clean up their act first before you give them shelter. You give them shelter and then you deal with the problem of addiction.
Absolutely right. I mean, all the evidence from Finland and all the evidence from pilots in this country and elsewhere is if you deal with issues of addiction, mental health and so on from the secure basis of somewhere to live, then the success is much greater. So, that does two things. It solves that individual's problems and deals with the personal issues and misery of homelessness. It's also more cost effective in the long run as well.
You said there are good examples from the United States, but we think of, for example, California having a huge problem. Hundreds of people, thousands, living in cars and RVs, in camper vans.
There's a huge problem in the United States, and certainly they don't have the sort of welfare safety net that we have. There are also some good examples of where you focus in on one particular issue, so veteran homelessness, for example, or where you focus the effort of the community in a particular town under the leadership of the mayor, where you can make really great progress. So there are some good examples. Similarly, in Canada, there are towns in Canada where they're claiming to have ended rough sleeping and homelessness by taking that approach.
Is this a realistic target to end homelessness, rough sleeping in the UK in, 9 years' time?
We think it's a realistic target. We think both, whether that's the target to end rough sleeping or whether a wider target to end homelessness, both of those are doable if you tackle both the symptom but also the cause. What's been announced today is a great policy on dealing with the symptoms and helping people who are rough sleeping. What hasn't been announced is anything which is about tackling the root causes.
John Sparks, Chief Executive of the British charity Crisis, speaking to Dan Damon. A recent United Nations report said that less than 10% of all the plastic ever made has been recycled, and that efforts to reduce plastic wastes have had mixed results. China, it said, was the biggest single source of plastic packaging waste, while the United States produced the most per capita. We're all used to seeing plastic waste around us, but what are we and our governments doing about it? Neda Tawfik reports from New York.
At City Hall Park, people sip their iced coffees and waters from plastic cups and bottles. Right in their view, a rally is staged to build support for a ban of plastic straws in New York City.
Here today to inform New Yorkers about a disturbing trend affecting our oceans.
Americans use plastic straws every day, but they're not necessary for most people and they're too small to be recycled, which is why across the United States, activists are hoping that getting rid of them could be a realistic start to reducing all single-use plastics in the country.
I believe that all of us really care about our environment.
The New York Bill's most famous sponsor is the actor Adrian Grenier from the hit American series Entourage and the founder of the Lonely Whale Foundation.
It's not a mystery that we have a convenience consumption problem, and we need to fix it. You know, part of it is education and making sure that people understand that nothing's disposable. Nothing really truly is disposable.
Were you ready to order more food? The Freehold in Brooklyn's hipster enclave of Williamsburg is designed to feel like a hotel lobby, minus the hotel rooms. Another mark of the restaurant's brand is their blue paper straws. Co-owner Brad Gallagher estimates they've kept 4 million of the plastic variety out of landfills and oceans.
We use what's called the ask for a straw here. So we make the customer ask us for a straw. 2 years ago when we did this, it was a little difficult because people are so used to a straw in their drink and it's just kind of like turn your mind off. That's there. I need that. Why aren't you giving me that? But now it's part of our brand ethos. Our customers expect it. They get it.
Still, even here, customers admit that they don't often think about the amount of plastic they use.
I don't think it's a nationwide conversation that we're having on a day-to-day basis.
People will often just do what's convenient and easy.
Does that apply to you too?
Yeah, it does. I have 2 plastic bags right next to me because I was shopping this morning.
It's now legal for food service businesses in Seattle to provide plastic straws and utensils.
There is a patchwork of laws to eliminate plastic straws and bags, but most legislation in recent years has banned bans. On the international stage, the U.S. refused to join other G7 nations to address the crisis. Environmental campaigner Carol Muffett says America is at the heart of the problem.
The American Chemistry Council estimates that the industry will spend $185 billion over the next few years to build new facilities or expand existing facilities for petrochemicals and plastics. And if those facilities are built, they'll increase our production capacity by more than a third, actively and significantly driving the problem and making it worse.
The plastics industry says it is just as concerned about the oceans and waste management. But in their view, the solution is to reuse and recycle.
We're going towards the scale where we weigh up all
the material.
Michael Christina runs Empire State Recycling in Queens. For years, he has sent plastics to China. It was the world's largest importer of scrap and a cheaper alternative to sending material by rail to the limited domestic markets. That was until Beijing decided it was no longer interested in the world's waste.
Well, I'm in the storage section of the facility where the bales of plastic are ready to be shipped out to buyers. And in front of me, there are these bales, 6 truckloads worth, actually, more than 200,000 pounds of this plastic shrink wrap. And this has been sitting here for 6 to 7 months. And if Empire State Recycling can't find a buyer, then it will end up in the landfills.
The other countries just don't have the infrastructure, so they can't process it quick enough. We just have so much of this recycled material that nobody can keep up with it. 60% of it's getting landfilled.
60% of the plastic that comes into your facility gets landfilled. And do you think that's common across the industry?
Yes. There's no market for certain plastics.
Sobering thought. That report from New York was by Neda Tawfik. And finally, a video of a politician holding cups of tea on a tray. Doesn't sound like the most exciting thing to watch, but a clip featuring Britain's former Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, has become a huge hit on Chinese social media, so much so that it's been viewed over 2 million times. Our China media analyst, Kerry Allen, explains why.
People have been talking about how his appearance looked, and as somebody who's a really senior official, they've had a lot of admiration for him in the way that he's appeared, with his cups of tea and his silly T-shirt and his shorts. And they've been saying that this is not how they'd expect a foreign minister or former foreign minister to appear. People have been saying online on the platform Sina Weibo, which is like Facebook or Twitter for Chinese people, that they would expect a former foreign minister to have, like in China, bodyguards, gates in front of their house. They would never expect to see a foreign minister out in kind of casual clothing, holding cups of tea out for the press. So there have been tens of thousands of people talking about this online on the platform Meowpie, which is a video website. And they've been joking about this. They've been saying, oh, they think he's really cute with his blonde hair. They've got a lot of admiration for him. And they've been saying that, yeah, they wish their politicians could be a bit more down to earth and less austere. Because in China, politicians tend to be, you see them in a suit, and a lot of their kind of conversations with the press are very scripted. So something like this, they would never see. Once a former official has retired, they more or less fall out of the public eye.
That was our China media analyst, Kerry Allen, on Boris Johnson creating a storm in a teacup. And that's all from us for now, but there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Nick Miles, and until next time, goodbye.